Carnivore Ray's labs. We're going to take a look at his labs, and he thinks he's metabolically healthy, but he's actually not. And I'm going to go over why that is and why he's probably in a lot more danger than he thinks. So if those of you who don't know who Carnivore Ray is, he's this guy that used to be like super overweight, went on a carnivore diet. Similar story to most of these people. They're overweight, not healthy, probably became diabetic, sleep apnea, hypertension, whatever. Decided to go on a carnivore diet, lost a bunch of weight, now feel better, think they're better, and they are now trying to promote this diet. They're using it usually to sell some kind of grift or supplements or whatever, or just to get popular. I don't know that this guy has any bad intentions other than he thinks he's trying to educate the world. Some of the comments he makes about cholesterol at the end are very off, and some of the comments he made about his own labs are way off. So we'll get into that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Allo. I'm a double board certified cardiologist, been teaching cardiology and cholesterol for a very long time. I actually even teach cardiologists. So let's get into it. So I'm going to play some of the pertinent parts of his video with a freeze frame, so I'm not like sitting here just nodding. You know, you'll just see me smiling. Just some background information. Obviously, he's not a doctor, so don't take what he says about his labs as accurate. A lot of people may have watched this video and been like, yeah, well, my AST and ALT is also this, and my alk phos is this, and my alk phos is that, and, you know, whatever it might be. Most of what he said is not interpreted from a physician. Like, obviously, we're physicians. We've gone through internal medicine and medical school and all of that, so we know, like, way more. You know, he seems to think that he said his sodium's a little bit low, but he eats lots of sodium. So there's, like, really a huge disconnect between what he knows and what he thinks, or at least what's going on these carnivore or keto blogs. Seems like a lot of the information he's regurgitating is like this carnivore keto type of stuff. He thinks at the end that he's metabolically healthy and has nothing to worry about. Well, surprise, surprise, my friend, you are not metabolically healthy, and we'll get into it and we'll discuss it right now. I'm just going to play the video so you guys can watch some of it. I'm going to cut out the parts that are not really that helpful. I don't think you guys really want to know what his potassium and sodium is and what his kidney function is. If I left it out, it's very, very normal. So I'm not going to play all of that. I will play some of his commentary at the end where he says he's not worried about his cholesterol because of his ratios and his metabolic health and all that. And we'll let you guys, and then I'll go through and I'll give you my comments. I am a cardiologist. I've done a lot of these response videos to a lot of people's blood work. You know, I did one on Ken Berry, steak and butter gal. You know, a lot of people. Ken Berry also turned out to be quite diabetic and insulin resistant, even though he thinks he's not. And it is the same with this gentleman, Ray. I'm not doing this to, you know, hurt your feelings or criticize you. I'm sure you're an amazing human being. You seem very nice and you like to teach. But please reach out to a physician that actually knows what on earth they're doing. You are obviously not a doctor, and I know you're not pretending to be a doctor, but you're giving out advice that is kind of bad. So please, I'm going to leave the video up and playing. I'm just going to sit here smiling. You guys can watch it, and then we'll go through some of his labs.
This is my blood work after 1 year on the carnivore diet. A major player in your complete metabolic panel is going to be your glucose level. Ideal is 70 to 99 milligrams over deciliters. I'm in perfect normal range. Hemoglobin A1C. This will tell you if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic. I am not. LDL 183. Total cholesterol 275. Recommended levels for total cholesterol 100 to 199. I am way over that. I don't give a rip. Glycerides divided by HDL. Ideally, you want that ratio to be 2 or less. Mine's a 0.61. Again, I'm not saying cholesterol is irrelevant. It's very relevant, particularly if you have diabetes or you're metabolically unhealthy. I don't have diabetes. Metabolically, I'm a frickin' tank. For somebody that's metabolically healthy and insulin sensitive, trying to lower your cholesterol is the equivalent of saying, hey, to prevent forest fires, we're gonna chop down all the trees in the world. That sounds pretty stupid, huh? Well, yeah, trees are incredibly beneficial. That's cholesterol. The tree's not the bad thing. It's the environment that the tree is in. That's it. Tell me how wrong I am.
All right, so I'm gonna start off with the stuff that is has to do with his insulin resistance. So if you watched my lab review of Dr. Ken Berry's labs, you know, you can scroll back a few videos and watch that. But his labs were also similarly horrific and almost exactly the same story. Carnivore Ray started out as a person that was quite obese, sort of like Dr. Ken Berry. They lost weight. They feel great. They found a diet that they can stick to. Similar story to what most people go through in their lives. They find a diet. They think it's the only way and like that it's a great way to lose weight and whatever. And it may be. There's lots of videos I have on here on weight loss, how to lose weight correctly, etc. I've written multiple books on it. nutrition, diet, exercise, weight loss. I actually have 3-hour videos on here, one on nutrition, one on exercise, one on weight loss. You can go find them. They're all evidence-based. Literally every single page in my books is multiple studies, with the data for those claims. I'm going to put as much of the studies up here as possible. Before I get into his labs, I want to touch on a topic that a lot of young people seem to think. A lot of young people seem to think, well, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm metabolically healthy, and I'm okay, I'm safe, so I can do whatever I want, and all of that. Sort of like the whole smoking thing. A lot of young people are like, I'm young, I'm healthy, I play sports, I can vape and smoke all I want, and then they don't realize by the time you're like 40, 50, 60, 70, you're like, oh, damn, I wish I would have never smoked, or, I wish I would have done something about this. So I know how the story ends. Come follow me around the hospital one day. Plenty of young people, literally every day, having heart attacks and strokes, mainly because they didn't know or they were misinformed. If you go on Twitter and search up the carnivores that are having strokes, there's actually one guy who has actually a book that he sells on why you should eat more saturated fat, and the cholesterol is not the bad guy, and he had a cholesterol of like 400 or 500 and has had multiple strokes and heart attacks. Some of them can barely talk or type now, and it's just a horrific outcome. So I'll point most people to the PISA trial, the prevention of early subclinical atherosclerosis. This was a trial that looked at people in their 40s. Median age was 40, so half were less, half were older. No calcium, no diabetes, low BMI, non-smokers, otherwise healthy young people. And they tracked them. People with a quote-unquote normal LDL of 110, half of them had subclinical plaque. And then as you went higher and higher, it was almost up to 70%. At about LDL of 150, they had almost 70% of people had atherosclerosis already. Now, of the people that had atherosclerosis, most of them had it in more than one arterial bed, which is obviously even worse. So you don't want to do that, and you don't want this to be you, obviously. The next trial that we'll look at is one called the Cardia trial. This looked at 5,100 men, ages 18 to 36, and it looked like time to onset of first event, like how long did it take to have an event? Those who had the highest cholesterols had the events the earliest. The ones who lowered their cholesterol, were on lipid-lowering therapy or just lower naturally, had a negative time to first event. So their first event was way less than the average in terms of days, years, etc. These were just young, healthy males, no smoking, no diabetes, nothing. And this is what happened to them. The next one is the pre-CAD trial, which went back and looked at the PISA data with more imaging and to see what could young people do to reverse some of that plaque in a 6-year span. And they did find that if you were to lower your LDL cholesterol and get it down, you would be able to reverse some of that plaquing, almost in some cases down to a point where it wasn't even detectable. So let's talk about Ray and his lab. So first of all, the obvious. His fasting glucose is 96. If you had no diabetes, no insulin resistance, no prediabetes, your fasting glucose would be like 70, maybe up to 80. His was 96, literally like 3 points or 4 points away from being pre-diabetic. So what happened was probably when he was much more overweight, he was told he was diabetic, and then he went on this, crazy diet, sort of like Butter Gal. Her A1C originally was like 5.7, or 5.5. She was probably told she's pre-diabetic or getting there, and she went on this crazy diet, lost 20 pounds, and all of her numbers improved. So that's probably what happened with him. He doesn't share any before and after numbers. But she did, and you can extrapolate because we do this for a living. So she lost 20 pounds, got her A1C down to 4.7. So his A1C was 5.5, very similar to Ken Berry and Butter Gal before she lost the weight. But this guy's not overweight or obese. I don't know if Ken Berry is overweight or obese now, but he says he lost 60 pounds. According to some of the comments in the sections, people are saying, no, he's back to being morbidly obese or whatever it might be. I don't know. So either way, he gained weight back and his insulin resistance is back. So one thing I do want to tell people is that insulin resistance is not something you can make disappear by selecting a better lifestyle, better diet, weight loss. You can reverse it to the point where you no longer need medications. Now, if Carnivore Ray, I'm just going to call him Ray. If Ray was told, listen, if you don't lose weight, we have to put you on medications. We might have to put you on insulin. We might have to do this. And he was like, screw this. I'm going diet, and, lost 200 pounds or whatever it might be. He did improve to the point where most doctors would probably see that 5.5 or fasting glucose of 96 and be like, you're fine. You're like 0.2 away from being pre-diabetic. You're like 4 points away from, being diabetic via the other measurement, whether it's glucose, fasting glucose versus A1C. By the time your A1C and fasting glucose are pre-diabetic, you're kind of far gone. It's more of a late stage, kind of final diagnosis. Usually you want to try to diagnose this stuff way before. I've talked about this before. You could do a lipoprotein IR score. You could look at fasting insulin if you want to. And track it over time. You could look at HOMA IR scores. The best test, the gold standard is called a euglycemic clamp for people who are not diabetic but want to know if they have insulin resistance. You could do an oral glucose tolerance test. This is like somebody who eats a bunch of food, waits about an hour and checks and sees their glucose. If it's over 140 in an hour, you probably are pre-diabetic or insulin resistant, and just that your labs aren't showing it yet. So there's lots of ways we have in medicine to diagnose this. I will tell you that diabetes is genetic. I put these up here multiple times in many videos. These are the genes that are associated with diabetes. There's at least 17 alleles or 17 spots in your DNA that give you type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is genetic. You got it from your mother or your father. You can worsen that and accelerate it by gaining weight, being less active, being put on birth control or other steroids for like inhalers or steroids, for asthma or pain or what have you. If you are inactive, it can happen. You could put on body weight and it can happen. Fatty liver, all kinds of things that can make it worse. The opposite of those things generally make it better. If you were pregnant and you got gestational diabetes and you delivered, you were taken off steroids, you lost weight, you built muscle, you're more active now, all of those things will improve your prediabetes, even to the point where you may get off medications. Now, what is the incidence of diabetes in the general public? It's about 9.3%, basically speaking. The amount of obese people we have in this country and all over the world is about 73 to 75%, somewhere in that range. So if diabetes were a disease where you just eat yourself into diabetes, which is what a lot of people think. Unfortunately, a lot of young people who just don't know anything are influenced by these medfluencers and healthfluencers who call themselves experts, thinking you can just eat a billion jelly donuts, gain weight, and give yourself diabetes. Absolutely not true. We all have patients that are 300 to 500 pounds that have an A1C of 4.4. In fact, we got tons of them. So we're trying to put them on Ozempic and Mounjaro to help them lose weight, and their insurance won't approve it because they are not diabetic or even pre-diabetic, and they won't approve it. So we have and I do obesity medicine, so I got lots of these patients that are like way overweight, 100 pounds, 200 pounds overweight, and they cannot get on Ozempic or Mounjaro because there's no way, there's not even a lick of diabetes or pre-diabetes. So with that said, first of all, he's pre-diabetic at the very least. He probably was more when he was more overweight. The funny thing is, he says, well, my cholesterol doesn't matter because I am as metabolically healthy as a tank. And he even puts up this tank video towards the end of his video. Depends on how you define metabolically healthy. He's okay. He has insulin resistance and it may get worse over time. If I was him, kind of like I told Dr. Ken Berry, I would, if he's lean as hell, which this guy is, I don't know if Ken Berry is, according to the comments, he's not. He could lose weight and probably help himself. But if you're lean as hell at a 5.5 or 5.6 A1C, you probably want to be on something like metformin. And then kind of see what happens. Or, if you're overweight, you want to obviously lose weight first and see what happens. But the insulin resistance is generally not going to go away. The diabetes prevention trial that was done showed that people who either exercised, took metformin, or did both, even if they did it for just a year or two, even 20 years later, had less incidence of prediabetes or diabetes. So if you take metformin, even for just a year or two, or exercise for just a year or two, you would not have the incidence of diabetes and your risk of diabetes go way down even 20 years later. And the other medications that were in this trial at the time, like the sulfonylureas and other things and other interventions they tried, did not have that same effect. A lot of the reasons we use different medications today is because we don't want to put people on insulin, because insulin makes it much harder to obviously lose weight and improve your health and all that kind of stuff. So that's that with the, quote unquote, metabolically healthy. He's definitely not metabolically healthy, depending on how you want to define metabolic health. If these people, and most of the carnivores think that metabolic health means you're not diabetic, right? And this guy is quite diabetic and he just doesn't know it, and he's just spewing misinformation. It's not his fault. He's not a doctor, but unfortunately, social media allows almost anybody to develop a platform and just start talking and saying a bunch of stuff that really makes no sense and no one should actually be listening to. but it's 2024 and people are allowed to create content. I'm sure at some point in time, once he develops a large enough audience, he'll probably be selling supplements or some other nonsense, which is what they all do. Even Paul Saladino, Carnivore MD, the actual first original carnivore that I debated on YouTube, is no longer carnivore and thinks it's a horrific idea and says no one should do it long term. So there's that. He started out criticizing people who sell supplements, and now him and Liver King together sell $100 million worth of supplements per year, if not more. Who knows? Now, I'm a free market capitalist. Don't get me wrong. You can go out and make all the money you want. Just don't lie to people to make sales. Don't tell people that they absolutely need liver, testicle, raw, oyster, whatever supplements to live healthy and optimally when they actually don't. You could be like, listen, I like liver. I can't get it all the time. Here's liver in a capsule. Cool. No big deal. Just don't lie. The next thing that he goes through is his LDL and total cholesterol. And he uses the lab values from the lab, which are incorrect. He says, well, my total cholesterol is 275 and normal is 100 to 199 and I'm way over. So first of all, normal is no longer 100 to 199. Normal is under 150. There is no target to treat for total cholesterol, so that really doesn't matter. So we don't really care about that number as much because total cholesterol can be anything. It's not a target of treatment, but it gives us a pretty good idea. 75% of your total cholesterol, usually sometimes maybe even 80, is usually your LDL cholesterol. Now, LDL is usually your bad cholesterol. If you want to learn, is cholesterol really bad for you and what is ApoB and what is LDL, watch the rest of the videos in this playlist, or, kind of scroll around until you find my cholesterol, lipids, longevity playlist. Now, and a lot of the topics in the longevity and lipids playlist come from my cholesterol book. And I'm running a textbook on cholesterol. It's been almost like 2 years in the making now. If you go to drallo.net/cholesterol, that's drallo.net/cholesterol, you can be on the list to know when that book comes out. All of these trials, all of these studies, all of these topics, literally this exact topic on metabolic health and cholesterol is a huge section of that book, mainly to dispel these rumors. Like, why are people thinking that you can be metabolically healthy and still have high cholesterol and be okay when not a single study has actually shown that? And I challenge people on Twitter every day. I'm like, listen, people, and other social media platforms, give me one single study. Just list one study that showed that if you're metabolically healthy and you have sky-high cholesterol, that you'll be fine. There isn't one. Not at all. In fact, it all shows the contrary. There's not one study that shows you'll have a reduction in anything. So let's not do that to ourselves. The worst part of his labs, obviously, is his LDL cholesterol. Another thing that I thought was funny is like, well, I eat a lot of salt, but my salt level is a little low. So I don't know how that makes sense. Again, he's not a doctor. There's no correlation between like you eating a ton of salt and somehow your salt level is supposed to go up. It's tightly regulated. Same with calcium, chloride, all that stuff, your BUN, the creatinine, and all that. So, and again, we'll get into his ratios because he talks about his ratios a little bit towards the end, and it's obviously all wrong as well. But his LDL was like 185, 186, something like that, which is also incredibly high. Like I said, in the PISA trial, normal, young, super healthy people, non-smokers, no calcium scores, ages under the age of 40, half of them, all of that good stuff, no hypertension, no diabetes, no smoking, none of the usual risk factors. They all had atherosclerosis if their LDL was over 150. 70% had atherosclerosis with an LDL, it was 64%, but you get what I'm saying, almost 70% with an LDL of 150. His LDL is 185. Now, of course, it has to do with an LDL over years. We now believe in cholesterol years. So if your LDL is 185 for 10 years, absolutely, you're going to have more accelerated heart disease. If your LDL is 185 for just 1 or 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, probably not going to be a huge issue. So he has time to reverse this. The problem is he's also diabetic and probably was diabetic for a while, but just not told he's diabetic. The worst kind of diabetics are not the ones that are diabetic and know they're diabetic. The worst is when you're diabetic and have no clue that you are diabetic and no one has told you. Now, I'm guessing when he was heavier, they probably told him, hey, listen, Ray, you're diabetic. You got to lose some weight or something, which may be why he decided to do this and go on this weight loss journey and do all this, which makes a lot more sense. Currently, he's not quote unquote diabetic, but he's insulin resistant, almost in the pre-diabetes range. I guarantee you, because his fasting glucose is 96, that when he eats food, it skyrockets well over 140. And he doesn't obviously check that, and nobody would really. But the problem here is he's been diabetic and now has atherosclerosis. So when you have insulin resistance plus atherosclerosis, your risk for heart disease is 2 to 3 times higher than what it was without the diabetes. So if you had high ApoB, high LDL cholesterol, if you don't know the difference between LDL cholesterol and ApoB, apolipoprotein B, watch the other video. It's just before this one, a few videos down maybe, or in the same playlist. But there's a difference between ApoB and LDL. But if you have high ApoB and you add on top of it insulin resistance and smoking and hypertension and obesity and, whatever else, anything else you can add to it, your risk is way, way higher. And insulin resistance especially, your risk is 2 to 3 times higher for the same given level of LDL. So if two people have LDL cholesterol of, let's say, 150, the person who also has insulin resistance, you can multiply their risk by 2 and maybe even 3. So much, much riskier. The other thing so he's at severe risk. I mean, if he continues this, which I hope he doesn't, hopefully like Paul Saladino kind of comes to his senses. He says about a year into his diet, he decided it was terrible and started eating carbs, simple carbs like honey, maple syrup, all that, fruit. So Paul Saladino has switched his diet within a year. So it might be time for Ray to switch his diet. And if you have diabetes, you have diabetes. You're pretty lean. You look pretty athletic and muscular. Now's a good time to probably get with an endocrinologist, get on metformin, whatever it might be. There's lots of ways you can treat that. And you got to be aggressive about it. You cannot let this linger, because letting this linger, the microvascular damage, there's macrovascular damage that can happen, like a heart attack or stroke, but the microvascular damage, which destroys the inside of the little tiny arteries, like the ones in your kidneys, the ones in your retinas, the visual loss, the toe amputations, the kidney failure, all that kind of stuff happens insidiously, and you don't realize it's happening because you didn't have the big one. You didn't have a heart attack or stroke, but the microvascular damage is actually a huge problem. You can check if protein's spilling into your urine. He might be a little young for that, might be too early. I don't know how long he was diabetic for, or if he even has hypertension or anything else, but you might want to go to an endocrinologist and have them check some of these other markers to find out if you do have actual kidney damage and destruction, or you caught this a little bit early. You can get on metformin or what have you. Stay active, stay exercising, stay lean, and you'll probably be fine. Obviously, switch your diet over to a Mediterranean diet, because all that saturated fat is obviously destroying your arteries on the macro level, on top of the micro arteries. The last part where he says, well, my triglycerides to HDL ratio, or my triglycerides to whatever I think it is, HDL ratio or whatever, I forget which one they look at. The one the carnivores always look at, he says that, look, it's 0.61 and you generally want it under 2. So first of all, that is not true. There's literally no data to support that. If you want, watch my video on here on HDL. I believe it's called How to Raise Your HDL. You do not need to raise your HDL. His was, I think, 85 is what he said in the video. There's no reason to even think about that, worry about it, consider it, or anything. HDL is usually genetically determined. African Americans, women, Hispanics, Middle Eastern, people of different descents have different HDLs, and it's mostly genetically determined. There are a few things you can do to quote unquote raise it, but it has not correlated with outcomes. We have made people raise it in different ways, with exercise, with niacin, with these other medications, the CETP inhibitors, and we've not found any benefit, any reduction in event rates or mortality or any of that. The other thing too is triglycerides. I have an entire video on here of triglycerides. I literally just uploaded it a few days ago. Go watch that. Lowering triglycerides with medications has never shown benefit, almost at all, unless it also lowers ApoB, unless you also lower your LDL cholesterol. So that we already know. Lowering triglycerides with lifestyle, however, can have a lot of benefits. Lifestyle meaning like you lost weight, you started exercising, you severely restricted caloric intake, stuff like that. If your triglycerides go down because of that, and you're not like malnourishing yourself or anything, you just get to a normal body weight, you slowly lose weight, you cut alcohol. Alcohol is a huge one. Or if you're diabetic, you get your diabetes treated. The vast majority of people I see with elevated triglycerides that come to me generally are uncontrolled diabetics. Now, he's not an uncontrolled diabetic. He is on the spectrum of insulin resistance, closer to the pre-diabetes range than most, and probably needs to keep a very, very close eye on that. Now, given his triglycerides were not super high or anything, but definitely you want to make sure that that is monitored. So reducing triglycerides via alcohol cessation, diabetes control, weight loss, activity, weightlifting, whatever, definitely helpful via other mechanisms. But reducing triglycerides via just medications has not shown benefits or outcomes. Now, do you need to worry about your triglycerides to HDL ratio? Generally not. It can be an indicator of metabolic health. If you have a pretty low HDL and high triglycerides, those are two of the markers or the two of the factors we use to determine if somebody has metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome is basically like an insulin resistant state, which although his numbers on his lipids look good, triglycerides not insanely high, HDL quite high, because he's genetically determined his genes or ethnicity or whatever. But because of those markers were not out of range, he's still insulin resistant because his 5.5 A1C and 96, almost 100 fasting glucose. So quite higher up on the spectrum of insulin resistance, almost diabetic. So there you have it. That is Ray's lab work. I highly recommend, Ray, if you ever watch this video, to please reach out to myself or a lipidologist or a cardiologist. We can help you. Almost any doctor probably could, actually. But you are not safe because you are metabolically healthy like a tank, or whatever it was, the comment that you made. Clearly you are not. You are maybe athletic and fit, and you view yourself as much healthier than you were before, which I totally get, and I'm proud of you. That's awesome. But definitely you have this underlying insulin resistance that you inherited from somewhere, and it's not just going to magically get better. So I highly recommend to try and see somebody to help with getting that corrected, fixed, or at least keep monitoring and keep an eye on it. That would be super beneficial and helpful. If you guys like stuff like this, join my community, drallo.net/community. If you use the code 1 month, you can get in there for free. And if you like this kind of stuff, go to my cholesterol masterclass, my cholesterol and lipids masterclass. It's the lipids and longevity cholesterol masterclass. It'll probably be linked below. And grab my cholesterol book, also linked below. You will have all the studies and all the data you could ever imagine. And if somebody that you know needs to hear this or thinks like Ray, send them this video or podcast. Search for Dr. Allo Show on your favorite podcast player, and it will all be there.